Welcome everybody. It is officially 6:30 p.m. and 5 seconds. It is March 6, 2018. We're here for a regular meeting of the Laramie City Council. The first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please rise and join me? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Clerk, can you do roll call, please?
Gabriel.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
McKinney.
Here.
Palikas.
Here.
Shumway.
Here.
Schuster.
Here.
Stoner.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Somerville.
Here.
That's 9 present and 0 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is a proclamation for Disability Awareness Month. Whereas disability in no way diminishes the right of individuals to live independently, enjoy self-determination, make choices, contribute to society, and experience the economic, political, social, cultural, and educational mainstream of American society. And whereas family members, friends, and members of the community can play a vital role in enhancing the lives of people with disabilities, especially when the family and community are provided with necessary support services, and public and private employers are aware of the capabilities of people with disabilities to be engaged in competitive work in inclusive settings. Whereas the goal of this city includes providing individuals with disabilities the opportunity and support to make informed choices and decisions, live in homes and communities where they can exercise their full rights and responsibilities as citizens, pursue meaningful and productive lives, contribute to their family, community, state, and nation, have interdependent friendships and relationships with others, and achieve full inclusion in society. Whereas thousands in Wyoming face challenges with disabilities daily, and whereas the month of March has been designated as Disability Awareness Month to celebrate and recognize disabled individuals and promote awareness. Now, therefore, I, Andy Somerville, Mayor of the City of Laramie, do hereby proclaim March 2018 as Laramie Disabilities Awareness Month, and encourage all citizens, businesses, public and private agencies, religious and educational institutions to join in observing the month in honor of persons with disabilities. So with us tonight, we have a good section of the Laramie Advisory Commission on Disabilities. We have Nick Wiseman, the LACD Chair, John Poland, the LACD Vice Chair, and members Mike Lovelly, Joe Ropp, and Marla Pewitt-Sandberg. I would invite whichever one of you wants to be the spokesman tonight to come on up and say a few words.
Thank you. Guess that's all the harder it goes. March is Disability Awareness Month, but what does that mean? It's about becoming more aware of the struggles that those with disabilities go through and helping them become more independent. It's about Sam, who struggles to push his wheelchair through the snow in the sidewalk that isn't shoveled. It's about Cynthia, who has severe arthritis and has trouble finding an apartment that has grab bars and no stairs. It's about Jean, who lost her vision and feels very alone in a now dark world. It's about Will, who struggles with depression and anxiety and now has lost his job. This may not seem too much of a problem to you, but to Sam, a couple of inches of snow that you didn't feel like shoveling is like the Berlin Wall.
Even a couple of bumps.
To Will, who lost his job, he feels like his life is over and he is worthless. To Cynthia, who is afraid she isn't going to be able to find a place and will end up homeless. And Jean, who has not only lost her vision, but is now afraid she's going to lose her job, her friends, and family. These are just a few struggles that people with disabilities deal with every day. So this March, I implore you to assist the lady who is 4 foot tall, who can't reach the cereal off the top of the top shelf of the grocery store, if you could do that for her. Shovel your sidewalk so Sam can get to work. Make sure your apartments are more accessible, and the neighbor who has fallen on hard times, help him out. Even a friendly smile can change somebody's outlook. If you have any questions, we can help. And if you have a disability, we can also assist you and help you refer you to the great disability organizations of Laramie.
Thank you very much for being here, and would you like to come forward and accept the proclamation? Thank you to everybody for everybody that's on the commission, for everything that you do. We really appreciate your service to the community and to the disability community in Laramie. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing for the transfer of a retail liquor license. City Clerk, can you read the notice, please?
Notice is hereby given that on the 15th day of February 2018, an application was received in the office of the City Clerk for transfer of ownership of retail liquor license number 15 from Jonah Inc., 2415 Grand Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming, to University Plaza LLC, 2415 Grand Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming. Public hearing to hear comments or protests relative to transfer of ownership of this license will be held Tuesday, March 6, 2018 at 6:30 p.m. in council chambers of City Hall. Action on this application will be considered at the regular meeting of the City Council on Tuesday, March 6, 2018 at 6:30 p.m. in council chambers.
Thank you. At this point in time, I will open up the public hearing to public comment on this transfer of a retail liquor license. Does anybody want to come forward and make comment on that right now? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close that public hearing. We'll move on to the next item. Announcements. City Manager, do you have any announcements this evening?
Mayor Hustle, there are no announcements. Thank you.
So I have one to share with everybody this evening. So again, for the 150th anniversary of the City of Laramie, I'm just going to give you another snippet of an ordinance. So this one's from June 17th, 1890. And it's related to sidewalk or streets, alleys, and sidewalks. It shall be unlawful for any person to dig any ditch, drain, or hole in or under any street, alley, or sidewalk within the City of Laramie without written permission of the engineer, describing the place and purpose for which such ditch, drain, or hole may be made. It shall be unlawful for any person to remove, it says injure, or obstruct any sidewalk within the City of Laramie without first obtaining the written permission from the city engineer, and so on and so on. It shall also be unlawful for any person to shut off the water supply in part to the city, or to connect any premises within the water of the city without the permission of the city engineer. And that just kind of goes on and on and on. There's no fines or penalties for any of this. You just have to get a note from the city engineer. So, Mr. Chapp, note writing privileges, we'll install those back in for you?
That's great.
All right. All right, next item is disclosures by city council members. Do we have any disclosures this evening on any items? Seeing none, we will go to the agenda. Vice Mayor.
All right, I move that the agenda be set as submitted.
Second.
Second by Councilor Shumway. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Vice Mayor.
I move that the consent agenda be approved and that each specific action on the consent agenda be approved as indicated.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Stoner. City Clerk, can you do roll call, please?
Gabriel.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Palikas.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Stoner.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
Thank you. That motion carries. We will move on to the regular agenda. So we'll go to item number 10. Councilor Stoner.
Thanks, Mayor. I move to deny without prejudice the Spring Creek preliminary plat as recommended by the Planning Commission and deny the exception to LMC 15.16.40.h regarding block length based on the following findings of denial.
I think we're missing a part. Are we?
That's
Is that it? Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, second by the Vice Mayor. Okay, we do have a motion for postponement that we want to put on the floor for this item. City staff, is there anything that you want to discuss before that? Okay. Councilor Stoner?
Thanks, Mayor. I move to postpone this matter to our April 17th, 2018 meeting and ask applicants to make any further written submissions as soon as possible in order to provide time for staff and legal review.
Second.
Second by the Vice Mayor on the postponement. Any discussion from council on the postponement? So I will add for the public that this postponement is there because we are lacking our city attorney right now to have this discussion. We also want to allow for the applicant to be able to submit any additional material. So with that, I will open it up to the public for any comment on the postponement.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Mitch Edwards with Nicholas and Tangent on behalf of Spring Creek Investments, the applicant. We're opposed to this motion to postpone. As we pointed out to you in our email a couple weeks ago, this application was submitted in January of 2017. That's over a year and 2 months ago. The applicant made objections to the exact conditions that are being discussed in August of 2017. There was a Planning and Zoning Commission that was delayed in October of 2017 for the staff to go get more information for the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission met in January of 2018, over a month ago, where they recommended approval of the subdivision plat to this council. 2 weeks ago, we had a city council meeting where we discussed with this council the issues relating to the motion and the impropriety of the motion to deny. We failed to see why it is that this project should continue to be delayed because the city attorney has not had a chance, according to him, to review these issues when it's been before the city staff for over a year. And these specific issues have been before the city staff since August of 2017. This delay is inappropriate and is without foundation. We are uncertain what the portion of the motion even means for the applicant to submit any additional submissions. All the submissions were made that were required under the law prior to it being forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is why it went to the Planning and Zoning Commission. There's no reason for this delay other than to cause damage to the applicant. Delay simply means that the applicant may miss another construction season for failure of this council to act on something that is properly before them under the procedures that are outlined in city ordinance. For this reason, we ask that you deny the motion to postpone and that you move on to the main motion which is on the floor regarding the denial, and that you vote no on the denial of this subdivision plat. If there's no other questions, I'll see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment on the postponement? Okay, seeing none. Any other discussion or comments by council on the postponement? I will just add for the record that we would ask that you guys submit any factual or legal information that you would like and do that in a timely fashion so that the city attorney can have a chance to review that before it comes up again on April 17th. If you could submit that in writing, please. All right, City Clerk, can you do roll call on the postponement?
Gabriel.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Palikas.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Stoner.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
Okay, that motion, that is postponed until April 17th, 2018. Move on to our next item, item number 11. Councilor Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. I would move to recommend that the City Council approve amendments to Title 15, United Development Code of the Laramie Municipal Code based on findings of fact and conclusions of law as recommended by staff.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Your Honor, may I interrupt? We
Please.
need the actual ordinance number read in that motion. That would be ordinance number 1978, sir. And authorize the mayor and clerk to sign.
Let me get it.
Yep.
Got it right here?
Yep.
I think you probably opened.
Okay.
So we just,
Just the first one.
yeah.
Restating my motion, Mayor, I would move to approve original ordinance 1978 on third and final reading in accordance with findings of fact and conclusions of law, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the ordinance.
Second.
Second by the vice mayor. City staff. Mr. Bloom.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, staff is also recommending 2 additional amendments that are actually shown on the cover sheet after the main motion. Those have actually been on the last couple of council cover sheets, but I think they may have been omitted as it moved forward. One of them is at the request of Rocky Mountain Power to remove the word three-phase from subsection A. When Rocky Mountain Power made a presentation to you, they mentioned that it could be single-phase, double-phase, or three-phase. So they just don't want to limit it just to three-phase in that subsection. They just want to cover all phases for primary power. And then number 16, that is just a straight-out deletion of that section. It's a duplicate that was included. 15 and 16 read exactly the same. In addition, since the last reading, there are several of those typographical errors that Klaus, Honorable or Council Member Hansen, had mentioned. Those have been corrected. Those are shown in the ordinance. The changes that were made are shown in red. So those are the typographical errors that were corrected, and they do reflect the deletion. Staff is recommending the approval of this ordinance as is presented to you on third and final reading. I'm open for any questions you may have regarding this.
Questions for city staff? Councilor Hanson.
Your Honor, I see them on the introductory page. Should we move these amendments, or?
I think we should have that discussion in a minute after we make sure there's no other questions on the ordinance
Okay,
as a
all right.
whole. Fair enough? Okay. Any questions? I have one question for Mr. Bloom. Under section 29, could you refresh my memory, because it's been several meetings ago since Rocky Mountain Power was here. On section 29 in subparagraph A, where it says existing pole-mounted primary greater than 600 volt electrical distribution lines and existing IT attached or adjacent to these poles. I get that. We want to, Rocky Mountain Power would like us to accept those from being undergrounded. But then the question of, comma, and any existing secondary lines less than 600 volts that are attached to these poles. Could you clarify for me, aren't all secondary power lines eventually attached to distribution lines? So how would you determine exactly which secondary lines would remain above ground and which ones would have to go below ground?
Honorable Mayor and Council, a great example is right across the street here. We have a,
Can't see across
well,
the street.
there's a, there is a,
It's too dark.
and if you look at the graphic on page 4 of the cover sheet, you have overhead lines in the alley. You have your three-phase primary power that runs on top. Those are the 3 lines that are parallel to each other. The way it reads, if someone were to subdivide the land, they would be able to remain above ground, as well as any secondary power or cable, telephone wires that might be attached to those poles. On these poles out there in the alley, there is another wire on the lower, in the middle, like the cable TV. There's also one for the telephone. Since they are attached to that pole, they would be allowed to remain. Now the word adjacent in there, it also means that if there is a secondary wire that's on a pole next to it, like right adjacent to it, it would also be allowed to stay. So if there's a utility corridor where there are poles with wires on it that are existing and they feature the primary phase, they could remain.
So could you clarify for me just again? I guess I'm confused as to which lines would be required to be undergrounded for secondary, because you could attach everything that's above ground to back to one of these poles. So are we not saying that everything's going to stay above ground?
Honorable Mayor and Council, if it is existing at the time of subdivision, it would be able to stay above ground. If it is something that is new and installed with the subdivision,
And it would go.
like a secondary or primary, it would go underground.
Okay, so that helps me understand this, because I think when we started with these iterations about 18 months ago, there was some differences, and now we are discussing basically creating a policy that says if it's existing right now, it can stay, and we're never going to make anybody bury lines again, even small secondary ones. But if it's new, then they have to bury them. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's correct. If it's,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I apologize. This has been a large, long technical discussion, and I wanted to make sure that I had that straight. Councilor Schuster.
This big fight that they're having over near 22nd and the cul-de-sacs on the north end of town. So are those lines gonna stay above ground now?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Schuster, they would be above ground.
Okay.
They'd remain.
Because that seems to be like the battle that's been going on for about 2 years now. So it's finally decided. Okay, just curious.
All right. Any other questions? Councilor Hanson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have similar question to you, just to clarify. There is a picture attached to this on that section 29. My understanding would be in a new development, only the ones marked primary wires up to 34,500 volts of electricity would go underground. Everything else could stay above ground. Is that correct?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Hanson, if there is an existing pole that looks like this, everything attached to that pole, provided it has a primary wire, would stay above ground.
Correct.
Anything new, so say they built a new street, like let's look at Indian Paintbrush area.
Sure.
There's an existing overhead line that parallels Reynolds Street. Actually, I think it may have been, I don't think it's over there, but there's one in the area. If they're to extend new utilities to those lots within the subdivision, all those new utilities would be undergrounded.
Every one of them?
The new ones that are installed from the pole to the residences.
Including TV cable and phone lines, and everything would be underground?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Hanson, yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Plickus.
Where do you see 34?
On another subject concerning
34,500.
paving the alleys, the way I understand it is if you are redeveloping or developing, mostly redeveloping, this would come into play, and you were putting anything over a threeplex, you would have to pave up to 400 feet of the alley, the whole alley, unless it's more than 400 feet long, correct?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Palikas, that is correct. I do have a cost estimate for the city's cost for paving alley, if that would help. The city's cost for paving an alley is about $100 a lineal foot. To put that in perspective, these blocks we have here in the inner city area, these are about 220 feet long, is that correct? I believe, yeah, 220 feet long. That would be a cost for the city to pave an alley of $22,000. Now the developers usually get a much better deal. Their costs are usually at least half of what the cities are, from what we understand from proposals that we've seen. So it'd probably be between 11 and 15 or 11 and 22,000 for that pavement.
Okay, so what standard are you using for the pavement thickness and the base and so forth and so on for these alleys?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Palikas, I'd have to pass it over to our engineering department regarding their standard details for alleys.
Is it the same as it would be in a street? Is it different?
Please, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I don't know, proper procedure for butting in. Councilor Palikas, I used, to come up with my estimate of about $100 a linear foot, I used about 4 inches of asphalt and about 9 inches of base. Now that's an average cross-section for the city of Laramie. We have a variety of different soil structures within the city of Laramie, and base and asphalt width can vary depending on the section of Laramie you decide to build the alley in. 4 inches of asphalt, 9 inches of base is typically what we see, though, and that's what I used for my estimate.
So the city standard would be 9 inches of, is that what this city standard for an alley would be? 9 inches of base and 4 inches of asphalt?
The city standard varies depending on the location in Laramie that the alley is being built in. Since I didn't want to do every single soil. I just wanted to do a quick estimate.
Okay, so is there a factor for removing the existing?
Yes.
The existing, and then putting in 9 to 12 inches of base and then asphalt on top?
Correct.
Is what you're saying? Okay. The next question I have is, a lot of these alleys have utilities in them?
Yes, there is water and sanitary in some of these utilities. We try not to put them, we don't put them in there anymore, but, so, our plan is with those utilities, if a development or if we are planning to pave a new street, we will update and upgrade those utilities to current standards before we do that, and then that's a cost to us.
We're gonna be upgrading all the utilities and alleys if we're gonna pave over the alley?
Only when the alley needs to be paved through development.
We would upgrade all the utilities in that alley?
Correct.
Second question I have is, we're going property line to property line, which in most of the old alleys is 20 feet, I believe, but if it were new, it would be up to 24 feet wide. What about all the vegetation and the gardens that are back in these alleys and the trees people have planted and structures? Who's responsible for removing all that?
Yeah, Honorable Mayor and Councilor Plikas, if someone's encroached within the right-of-way with a garden or a structure, the city would ultimately have it removed. The cost for that removal, it could be deemed a nuisance. It would be sent over to the property owner for removal.
That would be the property owner?
Yes.
Because, I mean, I can show you alleys where we've got bushes and gardens and everything else in there. Then I have another technical question. If we're going to go property line to property line, how can we go property line when we have fences lining these alleys? How can you get a machine right up to the property line if there's a fence in the way?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Plikas, that would have to be worked on during the construction process to see what type of cross-section or what type of alley is going to fit there. I don't know the exact answer to that question. That would be something that the contractor would have to work with during that construction process.
Yeah, I would imagine. Somehow I think the cost would be a little bit higher if he just can't run his machine down. Same thing with telephone poles. They'd have to pave around the telephone poles. They'd have to, if there's water in those alleys, they'd have to do every curb stop would have to be individually paved around. The curb stops are the shut-offs for your water for individual houses. So if you have a line in that alley, such as the alley I have at my house, every single house has a shut-off in the back, which would have to be paved around. All this has been factored in to the cost. One more question. So to be clear, if someone's building a fourplex, for instance, on the corner of the street, and his garages are coming off the alley, he would have to pave the other 400 feet of that street, the way this is written. Is that correct?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Plikas, it would have to be the remainder of the alley to the other street. 400 feet was just a number that was thrown out there as a above or beyond. We rarely have any alleys that are longer than 320 feet in the city. There are only a few.
Up to 400 feet?
Yes, it's up to 400
He would have to pave up to 400 feet, is what you're suggesting. Even though that garage may be 10 feet away from a street, or 15 feet away from the street, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have on that. Thank you.
Other questions for city staff on any of these sections? I know we talk a lot about the pyro lines, but on any of the sections, there's a lot in here. Okay, thanks, Bill. So, open it up right now to public comment on any section in this ordinance.
A little short for this. Your Honor, there's so much.
Can you identify yourself for the record?
Oh, sorry, I'm Sam Burkett.
Thank you.
Your Honor, there's to have certain areas built, like throughout the city, there's only so much money that they could do. There's like outside of Laramie, there's areas like made up of different substances like sagebrush, vegetation, and what have you. And then like other towns, like parts of the towns are made up like asphalt. So but there's only so much land that the public can own. That there's not much. What I'm trying to say is that there's not much that people can do in some parts. Like for instance, like north of Laramie, or like there should be like as you're going out to A7, there should be like parts of like other businesses that should be built there, but then like the public owns that land, and then like for so many years, like the areas like around the rec center and the high school, they're owned like by the city owned that land for years, and like the area like where the I've been a resident for years and for most of my life, and I basically know what it's like. And then the area where Chili's is made up of like where that used to be owned by the university, the land was. And I just want to say that there's just the point that I'm trying to make is that there's just so much that the city of Laramie can build that it would cut off like money and taxes and stuff that they're with different substances like asphalt and stuff that the public can own.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And when you go by the clerk's second table right there, can you sign in for us?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else? Mr. Coffey.
No difference.
They take all night.
I'll talk while it's going up. Dave Coffey Engineering. I wanted to echo some of Mr. Pelikas's concerns about the alley paving. I've worked on some of these projects where we have multifamily housing going in and to replace old, worn-out houses in some of the older parts of town, and paving the alleys. All the concerns that Mr. Pelikas brought up, I have concerns with as well. I'm also concerned about the city's solution for drainage, because most of these older parts of town, there's very little fall between the inlet and outlet of both sides of the alleys. When we put impervious surfaces on top of relatively pervious surfaces, we create more drainage, and I'm very concerned about how the city anticipates the engineering solution for that pavement to occur. I'm wondering, since there's been so much thought from the engineering staff, if they've direct that question to them. Maybe council would like to know that, as do I. Furthermore, when we pave this, how's it going to get maintained? I understand the whole point of this, or a lot of the points of this, is to eliminate the need to grade and maintain gravel alleys. Our Public Works Department already struggles to maintain streets. Why would we do this? Why would we make more pavement for the city to maintain? My other concern would be, if that's not the case, are we to expect an ordinance in the future that is similar to the maintenance of sidewalk and curb and gutter? Are we to see in the future that once these alleys are to be paved, that the adjacent landowners are now responsible for the maintenance of the pavement? That would be my concerns.
Thank you very much. And don't forget to sign in, please. Mr. Glass.
Honorable Mayor, members of council, Brett Glass. I'm an electrical engineer, so if anyone has any questions about power distribution, I've studied. I'm not currently practicing it, but I do understand it, so I may be able to help you with any of the technical questions about that. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about telecommunications, and specifically about implementing, especially if you require the pavement of alleys, implementing a dig once policy, either as part of this, preferably as part of this ordinance, but if not, as a follow-up as soon as you can. Definitely before you approve a large subdivision like the one that was, which you just postponed discussion of. The reason why is simple. Once you start paving the alleys even, it becomes a very difficult process to bring in new services. And you really need to have the conduits there in advance, have handholds there, have procedures in place for people to be able to come in. Or basically what you're doing is you're locking out potential new telecommunication services. I don't think that as a 21st century city we want to do anything like that. So I'd like to ask that you either include that in this ordinance, or if it's just not practical to do that because staff hasn't finished the work, that you do this by the time you approve new subdivisions. I think that that's extremely important. I've gone to the state and asked them about their dig once policy for highways. It turns out that they sort of have a loose one that they're firming up for interstate highways, and they're still working on it for state highways which are not interstate highways. However, the National League of Cities, I understand that our mayor and also Councilor Hanson are going to be going to their conference soon. They already have prototypes for these ordinances. Please look at them and please implement this before things happen, such as so things happen that would make it difficult for new services to come in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and don't forget to sign in if you haven't already. Thank you. Is there any other public comment this evening on this item? Going once, twice. Okay, so we'll go back to council for discussion. Vice Mayor?
I am going to offer an amendment. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to keep talking?
No, I think we can go ahead. Let's start with the amendments. Go ahead.
So I would like to move that section 29A be deleted.
Do we have a second for that? So if we can talk about the section numbers and give everybody just a second to get there. 29 is the power lines, and 29A is specifically the undergrounding requirements, or no, excuse me, the exception to undergrounding. One of the two exceptions. Is everybody there? Second for Councilor Stoner.
I don't see the A.
I see no A.
If you go to section 29 on the ordinance, section 29, and then the A.
Oh, wait a minute, I'm in the wrong document, right?
Oh, I'm in the wrong document.
Page 6. Page 6 of the ordinance. Not the cover sheet. Sorry. Yep.
6 of 12.
Page 6 of 12, section 29, A.
A, existing.
We'll make sure everybody's there before we discuss.
1 second.
Okay. Apologize to the audience. This is a rather long document. We need to all be sure we're all in the same place at the same time.
All on the same page.
I'm there.
Right? Are we good over there? Everybody pulled up? Okay. So Vice Mayor, just for clarification and to help the audience, why don't you read what you're proposing to delete?
Okay, so 29A reads, sorry. Existing power or pole mounted primary greater than 600 volt electrical distribution lines, any existing IT attached or adjacent to these poles, and any existing secondary less than 600 volt electrical lines attached to these poles. And so I'm asking for the deletion of the first exception.
Okay. All right. Any initial discussion from council on this before I take public comment? Or any questions on this before I take public comment? Okay, so let's go to the public first. Does anybody have any public comment about this amendment? Hold a second. Mr. Harris.
Jamie Harris, Laramie Chamber Business Alliance, Honorable Mayor, Council members. Big concern with this is that Cirrus Sky, I'll just use this as the example. The lines that are running across Cirrus Sky, that was final. The plat was final platted by the city council. If we're required to bury those lines, we will come to you and ask for the money because of this ordinance. If this is not rectified in some manner, so we can do the final platting for the subplatting, the money's gonna have to come from the city. It's very, very expensive. So I just caution you not to remove this, and I respect Vice Mayor Pierce's position, but it's a very, very expensive proposition to bury these lines. You've heard from Rocky Mountain Power, you've heard from CLDC, you've heard Roger Struby's comment, public engineers. I'm not a subject matter expert, but I understand what it takes to develop this. So I just really caution that removing this language will be another barrier to development of Sierra Sky. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on this amendment?
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, Council, Dave Coffey Engineering again. I would like to echo Mr. Harris's comments regarding Sierra Sky, but representing the developer community, eliminating this is very costly, and it will assuredly cost development occurring in Laramie if that is taken out of this language. That language that Ms. Pierce is suggesting be deleted it's not a business-friendly move, and it will discourage development in certain places in town.
Thank you. Is there any other comment on this amendment? Okay. I do have a clarifying question for city staff. So can you clarify exactly what type of lines are running across Sierra Sky? Because I believe we understood that they were connected to WAPA.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, I believe we have an exhibit that's actually on the agenda. It's the second to last one on the list. It's called Sierra Sky. It shows...
Give us just a second to get there. Sorry, we've got a lot of pages.
That's right.
Which document is it in?
It looks like this.
Yep, getting there.
The blue line.
Yeah.
The blue line. Okay.
With the Sierra Sky project, there are actually 3 lines that actually run through the property. The red one on the south, that's the one that we talked about with Stagecoach. That one would be required to be undergrounded. The blue WAPA line that parallels, or mostly parallels, Cirrus or Cumulus Drive, that is a WAPA transmission line. That would be allowed to remain. The line that parallels Asphalt Road, that is a Rocky Mountain Power line that would be required to be undergrounded.
But the WAPA line would not be required to be undergrounded.
Yeah, correct. The blue lines you see here, those would not be required to be undergrounded. This is also similar to the WAPA transmission line you will see on the east side of 45th Street that actually crosses over Grand at Boulder Drive, and then it does a turn and heads out of town that direction.
And can you clarify under the current ordinance that the 2 red Rocky Mountain Power lines that are shown right now would be required to be undergrounded under current ordinance, correct?
Honorable Mayor and Council, under current ordinance, all of these lines would be required to be undergrounded. Under the proposed ordinance by staff, these would all be able to remain. With this proposed amendment, only the blue WAPA line would be able to remain above ground.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
So now I'm just as confused as before. The one that goes across Sierra Sky, is it gonna stay above, no, just tell me, is it gonna stay above ground? Or does it need to be grounded? Because I thought I heard it said it had to be grounded now.
So there's 3 lines, right? So the WAPA line, under this amendment, the WAPA line would stay up.
Okay.
And would not have to be undergrounded, but the 2 red Rocky Mountain Power lines that are shown here would have to be undergrounded. But right now, those are required to be undergrounded under current ordinance.
So the one on the cul-de-sacs, if we pass this amendment, do they stay above ground or go underground?
Underground.
They go underground, okay.
Yep.
So what I asked earlier now is changing because of this amendment. Thank you. Now I understand.
Any other questions? All right, discussion on the amendment. Councilor
So-
McKinney?
So taking that language out, any and all after this, the constructions, all the smaller lines will have to be grounded? Underground, all of them.
Well, they are.
And it's way more expensive.
There's I would let the city staff comment on cost, but
Yeah, it's
there would
way
be a
more
cost.
expensive.
So I want to add just a couple of thoughts here. I'm leaning towards being supportive of this amendment because, so right now we have everything undergrounded. And the concern that was brought up 18 months ago, the first time we talked about this, was the WAPA power lines. They are massive, they're huge, they're crazy expensive to underground. This amendment would take care of that, and also for the ones that are on 45th Street, it would eliminate the big one. But it would still require these, what I consider to be normal neighborhood transmission lines, to be undergrounded. The way the ordinance is written right now, we're just gonna leave everything up. And I really appreciated Rocky Mountain Power being here, because one of the things that they said that really rung home with me is there's a cost, it's kind of shifting cost around, whether you keep them above and whether you underground them. The community a long time ago decided to underground them for a lot of reasons, I'm sure. But the one that sticks with me is reliability and keeping the power outages to an absolute minimum. And Rocky Mountain Power stood here and said undergrounding certainly does that. And to me, I think that's a pretty important priority for the community. I understand that there's some cost that's going into it, which is why I'm willing to split the baby, so to say, keep the really expensive ones above ground and require the lesser ones to be buried. The reliability thing really, really hits home with me. So I'll leave it at that. Councilor Schuster.
I understand what you're saying. My house is nice and it's got the power underground. And it's nice not to have anything hanging out. I'm sure some of the older houses have it above ground because that's what it was. I have actually helped people bury cable after we had it marked and everything like that because they no longer wanted it above their house, but all they did was bury it to the back alley where the power then was above ground. I like that if it's existing there right now, fine. We're going to deal with it. But now to say that, okay, it's going to go this far across the city, and now you got to take it underground, and you have to bear the burden. That's what I don't like. Because we talked about, well, we now have people that look at a subdivision and go, wow, if I do all this to all these houses, and I can no longer have that standing in the alley, that's going to cost me an extra, I don't know, $100,000? That maybe I'll just sell this property off and not worry about putting a subdivision in Laramie. Right now, the prediction is that a huge amount of people are going to be migrating to Laramie and Cheyenne over the next 20 years, and we're not going to have enough houses. That's been the prediction because Fort Collins, they said, is built out to their limits, and now we're going to have this happen here. Well, we're not going to create any friends for building subdivisions. I'll sure say that. So, no, I'm not going to support this amendment because what's already there is there. It's like saying, I don't like that street there, so let's change it. So, no, I can't support this.
Councilor Pelekas.
I think there's some confusion going on. There's three different generalized types of lines. There's your residential lines, which are numerous throughout the community, and those aren't that expensive to bury in comparison. There's on the other extreme end, there's the extreme high voltage WAPA lines, the ones that your hair kind of frizzes up, if you have any hair, when you walk underneath them. And I'm just using that as an exaggeration. But they're basically your transcontinental transmission lines. But then there's also these 600 volt lines and above that are the supply lines, if you will, from the substations to your residential. And those are the ones that there's probably more of in our community. And you know, this is kind of interesting because we don't have a lot of lines in our community. We act like in our development areas we have power lines everywhere that we need to bury. There are some cases where we do have some power lines, but they're not that many throughout our community. But anyway, these lines are also expensive to bury, a lot more expensive. And these lines are the ones that if they go down, these are the ones that affect a lot of homes and so forth and so on. It makes sense to me from an aesthetic standpoint to put lines underground. Your argument as far as storms and so forth and so on is a valid argument, but I want to keep something in mind here. We don't have major issues in this part of the country with power lines going out and people not having power for weeks on end, such as what's happening in Massachusetts right now. Okay, because we don't have these hurricanes, we don't have these storm surges and so forth and so on. So listen, I've been here for 40 years and there was one time where we had power outages that lasted more than 2 days in 40 years. It's not an issue in Laramie, Wyoming or any place else in the West as far as power going out and not having power and having to go down and buy generators and everything else. It really isn't an issue. Okay, back to these lines. It makes sense to bury the ones that are affordable to bury. It makes sense in all new subdivisions to put the lines underground, but these medium high voltage lines, if you want to call them that, the cost it takes to bury them compared to the benefit of having them buried, I can't justify in my mind. And it's not like we're dealing with this on every single subdivision we do. The majority of them, we're not dealing with it. There's a few special cases in our community where we have to deal with these 600-volt lines, and that's it. And by the way, once housing goes up, I mean, there's a power. It's interesting to me because we were arguing about a line that was in the middle of a subdivision that some people thought should be buried, which is up by Cirrus Sky. Okay. What's interesting to me is to get to that subdivision, you drive up 22nd Street, which is an existing street. How many of you realize there's a power line that goes all the way along 22nd Street? Okay. You don't realize it unless you actually look for it. It blends in. So what I'm saying is we're making a big argument over something that's very expensive to do, and the value of doing it, I can't justify in my mind. Now, all the residential lines, all the stuff that's new coming in, absolutely, it's a tremendous improvement compared to what the old subdivisions look like, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these exceptions of power lines that we have in our community that have been existing for a long time and whether they should be buried. And there's not a lot of them out there. There really is not. So I'm not going to support this amendment for that reason, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Henson, before I go to you, I want to get a clarification from staff on something, because I think it's really important to make sure we're all on the same page. My understanding of the way that the ordinance is currently being proposed to us, these residential lines, I couldn't agree more. They need to be buried. It's caught up in this. If they're attached, because the ordinance reads if they are, so it is for existing pole-mounted, greater than 600-volt electrical distribution lines. That's the big lines we're talking about, right? Okay. Any existing IT attached or adjacent to these poles, so any telecommunications that's attached to these poles, no, regardless, would not have to be buried, and any existing secondary and less than 600-volt electrical lines attached to those poles. So that says to me, even if you've got this transmission or this distribution line running across here, and it's providing power to this neighborhood down here, you don't have to bury any of these residential lines. So we're catching everything up and essentially saying we don't have to bury anything that's existing if redevelopment occurs. And that's where I have the problem with it. So I want to clarify that and make sure that we're on the same page.
Okay, and can I add one thing also, very quickly?
Sure.
The residential lines that you're worried about, they're non-existent, because the only reason they're there is in existing subdivisions that have already been built out. Any new subdivisions going in does not have residential lines in it. It only, if it has anything at all, on extreme occasions it'll have a 600-volt line. So we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, if you will, because residential lines having to bury residential lines in new subdivisions is not an issue you see out there. It's not there. Thank you.
Councillor Hanson?
Just need a clarification. I'm looking at my alley in the back. I have 240 volts coming into the house, 3 phases. Now, the line above ground in my alley, what is that? Is that a 600 volt line or is that a 240 volt line?
Right, 440. It's a residential.
It's a residential 240 volt line. Now, I'm still unclear. Is that supposed to be buried or not to be buried?
Under this current ordinance, it would not be buried.
But if we take that paragraph out,
then it would be required to be buried.
In the
is
future,
my understanding.
if it's new.
Right.
If you built a new house, yes.
that's the next question. I don't see any timeline on here. You know, is this going to happen in 2 years? Is this going to happen as we redevelop the section of town, or if the surface the alley, or, you know, that's all unclear to me.
If you tear down your house and build a new one, bury it. If you leave your house, leave it.
Mr. Bloom, would you clarify the timeline, please?
Honorable Mayor and City Council, the question is the service line that a lot of people might see in their backyard from the power line to the house, will that be required to be undergrounded? All of those lots are already platted, so they can exist as is. If you are building a brand new structure, tearing down your house and building a new one, yes, you'll be required to underground it.
Right.
If there's a brand new subdivision that's being constructed, all of your service lines will have to be underground in your backyard, cable, TV, everything. So long story short, if it's existing and it's on a lot, it's going to stay the way it is, unless you completely tear down your house and start over.
That's the way this is written.
Yes.
At this point.
Councilor Stoner, did you have a clarification question?
Thanks, Mayor. I was just hoping that Planner Bloom could clarify. It seems like there's a discrepancy between what you were expressing and what Councilor Palikas was expressing, and I'm still confused about that piece of it because of the connection. So the wires that are perhaps connected to these 600 volt.
Could you speak a little bit more to the phrase, and any existing secondary less than 600 volt electrical lines attached to these poles? So if there's any attachment for any voltage, it would not be required to be undergrounded.
Honorable Mayor and Council, what the intent is if you have a pole that is going to remain because it has primary wires on top, it doesn't make sense to take just the cable TV, just the telephone lines, to take those off and then trench in the paved alley or unpaved alley, whatever's next to it, and to trench it and bury that. So the intent is that if you have a pole with those primary lines on it, whatever's attached to it, that can remain. Now, yeah, that would remain, so you wouldn't have to underground those.
And I have a follow-up, Mayor. How often are they attached? Is it always? Is it sometimes?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Stoner, most always in the existing neighborhoods, those wires are attached to those poles. In the new neighborhoods, not at all, because there aren't any poles, they're all underground.
Councilor Schuster.
While you're up here, just a quick question. They talked about on Sears Sky. I know that our 2 new buildings attached to the wires we're talking about, but they've been undergrounded from the pole to the buildings. So he was asking about future building in Sears Sky. Will that line stay above ground, or will we have to put it underground and then attach to each building? Will the existing line that runs up to the top of that hill and cruises on across, will it stay above ground and then each development will come down the pole and across the development, or will the whole thing, do you have to be undergrounded?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Schuster, there's 2 answers. The way the ordinance is drafted by staff, they would remain up, they would be underground at the pole, and then ran underground to the new business.
Okay.
And that would be a service line, and then that could actually feed off to multiple businesses. It'd be an underground.
So just like we've done with the 2 buildings we have.
Now, with the amendment on the table, that line would have to be undergrounded. There'd be a vault installed, and then that new power line would then, or there'd be a new underground line that would then provide service to multiple buildings.
So we will have to, after, well, probably before, since we need to underground it going up the hill and make it look good, we would be undergrounding it and then and then everybody will hook to where the vaults are.
And yeah, correct.
Okay.
Honorable Mayor, if I may, I just pulled some quick numbers based on our most recent variance request we had for power line undergrounding, where they contacted Rocky Mountain Power for estimates. This being Stagecoach, which is the line up on Buford Street. And then the other one was over at the old cold storage building, where they have a recently relocated above ground power line that was relocated in conjunction with YDOT. Both of those numbers come to a rough estimate of about $170 a lineal foot for a cost to underground. The Rocky Mountain Power has said that cost is 10 times more than what it is for installation of overhead power. Those costs include such items as trenching. Doesn't include boring if you have to actually bore under an existing street. It includes the cost of running the wire. Doing some quick and dirty math looking at Sierra Sky, because we're familiar with the two red lines that we pointed out. Those are roughly each about 2,599 feet in length on LEDC's property. That would come to a price tag for both of those at about $870,000 for undergrounding of those two lines.
Excuse me.
Councilor Hanson.
Thank you. I presume we're still
We are on the amendment.
just discussing the amendment,
Yep.
removing paragraph A. I'm looking at my neighborhood, taking out that paragraph, then I'm still confused as to what will happen. Is there a timeline? Because now, of course, it says everything has to be underground, blah, 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 and that paragraph is gone. And now I'm confused. Is there a timeline when my lines have to be all underground?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Hanson, no. Unless all of your neighbors get together and decide to replat your entire neighborhood and start over from scratch, you would not see an undergrounding requirement in your neighborhood because it is an existing subdivision.
But you're talking about taking out that paragraph.
Correct. This only applies to new subdivisions. So this is only in conjunction with the subdivision process. For example, if Burger King were to tear down their building again, they can rebuild it. The undergrounding provisions don't apply to them. In fact, they did that. They tore their building down, didn't have to underground. Starbucks tore down Teriyaki Bowl, didn't have to underground the power lines. McDonald's, same thing. That's because those were site plan review applications on already platted lots. So this only really applies to a handful of areas in town, like the cold storage building where they're trying to develop. Power lines are going to be an issue there. North, Sierra Sky, Stagecoach Edition, yes, in that area of town. Wherever you might have overhead powers on unsubdivided land, that's where this applies.
To clarify, so in the, before paragraph A, the statement concurred with final platting all new but it says existing IT communications lines and are to be buried. If that paragraph is one, then it says again existing and new. So I don't understand it, quite frankly. Existing is existing. Mine is existing. Does it have to be buried then, without that paragraph?
No.
Mr. Bloom.
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Hanson, at the end of that sentence, the subsections A and B, those are exceptions to the rule of everything. So it says everything shall be buried except in these circumstances.
Yeah, but in the original statement, it says all new and existing lines. So existing is existing, to my mind.
Councilor Hanson, it only applies if you're going to do a whole new subdivision. If you're going to replat that area. So it's not, there's no, we're not setting out any timeline where all the lines have to be undergrounded in Laramie. There's no total transformation of power lines. This is very specific application driven.
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Hanson, if I can back up, this is a subdivision requirement, so this only comes into play when we're subdividing. This is not a blanket city ordinance, so it's only a required finding when someone's subdividing that they've done this with their new subdivision.
Okay, all right. I think it probably needs a biblical exegesis. Thank you.
Other comments? Vice Mayor.
So just to get going back to Sierra Sky, it's existing, right? So we're good at Sierra Sky, right? Or no?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Pierce, as proposed by staff, it would allow for those existing lines to be left remaining in place, left up.
So there's no $800,000 cost.
Correct.
Correct? Thank you.
With the amendment, it would require those to be buried.
There is a cost.
And then there would be $800,000 cost.
Okay. So I have a question here, because we seem to be having a divergence between commercial and residential. And this happened 18 months ago, if memory serves me correct. We kind of went through this whole conversation and the council kind of converged on this. Well, we're okay with the commercial lines staying above, cold storage, Sierra Sky, that kind of stuff. Where we get really uncomfortable, and at least where I'm uncomfortable, is the residential neighborhoods. And this goes directly to Stagecoach. They want to do a subdivision. They don't want to bury the lines. They're waiting for us to change the rules so that they can reapply and skip the rules that are on the books right now. So how can we split these two out? How can we split commercial and let those stay above and require the residential lines to be, or anything going into a residential neighborhood to be buried? What can we do there?
Honorable Mayor and Council, you could base it off of zoning. For example, subsection A could only apply to non-residential zone properties. B2, TO, B1, list them out.
Okay.
And then that would allow for industrial and commercial subdivisions to have their lines above ground and require that residential subdivisions bury all of those primary lines.
Okay. I like that, but we'll see where this conversation goes. That seems clean and kind of straight to the point. Getting hand signals in the back. All right. Any further discussion on this amendment? Councilor Stoner, please.
I'm still looking for a little bit of clarification around Councilor Palikas' point of this not being relevant for the most part, and I don't know who to ask for that clarification, but that is a big question mark in my mind, perhaps for
Mr. Bloom.
Look at Derek's face.
I should have been sick again. Could you rephrase the question, please?
There was conversation, and I believe you mentioned that for the most part, this doesn't come up much. It just isn't really relevant. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, Honorable Mayor and Councilor Stoner and Council. It really doesn't come up very much. When it does come up, the applicants do request variances because it is an added cost to development. As noted earlier, the areas of town that are most affected are areas around our existing WAPA power stations. We have the one on the north side of town, so that affects the Sierra Sky development. It probably would affect any residential area that might grow north of the Alta Vista neighborhood and Indian Ridge because they're existing power lines. There are some areas in the center of town, for example, the cold storage building. Those are areas that are affected because they have overhead lines as well that aren't WAPA transmission lines. And then there's areas south near the high school because there is there's a electrical power substation there at the future intersection of 30th and Boulder Drive. So really, this does affect a lot of our areas in town which are growing or trying to grow. There are probably some areas in West Laramie, like near Colorado and Wildtech, that I think are not touched by this, but I really haven't had the opportunity to look at the lands out there and see if there are existing overhead power lines. But really, this is affecting a lot of our areas where we're trying to target growth.
May I ask a follow-up?
Please.
What would the variance process look like if, just hypothetically, this amendment passed, and then there's a developer who wants to apply for a variance so they don't have to bury the line?
Honorable Mayor and Council, the variance process, traditionally, it's defined in state statutes. A variety of different states have state statutes that define what the required findings are. Literal interpretation of a variance is that there's something unique with the site, like a irregular shape, unusual topography, just something strange that if we were to reasonably enforce the code, that it couldn't be developed and that it would have zero use. So in theory, if someone applies for a variance for a power line undergrounding, staff's response typically is going to be to recommend denial, because just a financial burden is not enough to warrant a variance. It's merely the developer just wanting to remove an inconvenience. However, when the Board of Adjustment does make a decision on a variance, they can weigh into a whole bunch of different other factors, and they're able to make their required findings. A lot of times they do find ways to figure out, oh yes, this is slightly unusual, this is unique, this should be approved. In our variance cases for power line undergrounding that we've had, the Stagecoach one was denied by the Board of Adjustment because the additional cost per lot was roughly $2,000 to $3,000 per lot that would have been added cost. With the industrial subdivision over here for the cold storage, since they're proposing a 3-lot subdivision, the cost was about $60,000 to $70,000 more, and they granted per lot, so they granted that variance. So variances aren't the best tool.
Any other discussion or questions before we put the amendment to a vote? All right, City Clerk, can you do roll call on the amendment, please?
Gabriel.
No.
Hanson.
No.
McKinney.
No.
Polikis.
No.
Shumway.
No.
Schuster.
No.
Stoner.
No.
Pierce.
Yes, I guess.
Somerville.
No.
That is 1 yes and 8 no's, Your Honor.
Thank you. That amendment fails.
Nice
All right.
try.
So, this is a little unusual to stop in the middle, but I have a feeling we're not done with this discussion, and it is 7:45. So I would like to give everybody a break before we get into the next set of amendments and other sections of this ordinance. So let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and pick it back up.
Okay. 380, right? Yeah, I think
All right.
380.
So we're back on. All right, so we are still on original ordinance number 1978, discussing all sections again, and we'll open the floor to any other amendments that want to go forward.
I would
Councilor
like
Polikis.
to make an amendment concerning the paving of alleys.
And remind me which section that is, please.
You know,
Several. 33, 34.
Where are we going?
32.
well, it's not really 24, okay, section 34.
Okay, thank you.
And the amendment I'd like to make is rather than paving the full alley, that the paving requirement only be to the nearest right-of-way, i.e. a street,
Okay.
period.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second by Councilor Schuster. First, I want to ask city staff if that's clear enough.
Is that,
Or do we need city staff? Just want to, since we're kind of amending on the fly, I want to make sure we get the language right.
I didn't try to wordsmith it, but I think it can be wordsmithed really easy within the section 34.
Do we need a second to kind of look at that then?
I'll take a look at it real quick.
Okay.
So,
Hang out for a second,
if I may,
please. While we're looking.
the reason behind it is numerous, but it doesn't make sense to me. If I build, or if someone were to build a unit that's just say one house in, or even on the corner, it's just not doesn't make sense to me to pave the whole alley for the necessity of having a good surface that's not going to deteriorate. Because I guarantee, I mean, I've been in the apartments business for years, and the one thing I know about people, they always park as close as they can to the front door, and they, irregardless of whether you give them a carport or not. And secondly, they always go the shortest distances. People don't like to go longer distances. And thirdly, if something is paved, they're going to go on the paved surface versus a dirt surface. So I'm not worried about the rest of the alley getting torn up and so forth and so on. Secondly, I got some prices on what it costs to do a 400-foot alley, 24-foot wide, and I got it from a reputable contractor in town. You guys would all know him. I don't need to mention his name, but he does a lot of work even for the city. We talked about it. We talked about all the challenges. They're numerous. They're just numerous, and every alley's going to be different, depending on what's in there. He said it's to reconstruct an alley and do the pavement. It's going to be between $50,000 and $75,000 for a 400-foot alley. That's a deal breaker. People are not going to. That's enough money differential that you're not going to see these projects go through. So I think we're using a sledgehammer where we can just use it. We can use something less than a sledgehammer, if you will. So that's why I'm suggesting the difference, and I think it would be effective and get done what we want it to accomplish.
So I'm going to go to see if city staff is ready. Ms. Bloom?
Still regretting.
Honorable Mayor and Council, in section 34, on the third line of the new language, what we would do is we would change it to read, for all existing alleys, comma, paving of, we'd strike the words, the full length of, so that would disappear. So say paving of the alley to the nearest right-of-way is required for any project requiring full compliance with the development standards of this title pursuant to LMC 1410B. So that would be the change. That would address Councilor Pelikas's amendment, and it would only require pavement to the nearest street and not the full alley.
I agree.
Councilor Plinkus, okay. City Clerk, did you get his language? Okay. Making sure.
Thank you.
The T's, dot the I's. All right, so discussion from council on this before I go out, or actually questions before we go out to the public for comment on this first. Any questions on this? Vice Mayor.
So I guess if they're required to pave to the nearest road or street and not go the entire length of the alley, we will have an alley that is dirt, then paved, right?
Right.
So we go off the paved street, onto dirt, onto pavement, back onto the paved street, right? That's what we're saying. So I guess my question is, in terms of construction of a road, right, when we go from a road that's a common alley in Laramie is one where the center is really high and the where your actual wheels go is really low, and there's quite a difference between where your wheels are and where your car actually goes, and you end up hitting a lot of weeds when you're going through there. I mean, I think that's a little messy and a little uncomfortable, and I'm kind of curious about, will the pavement deteriorate if we're going from a dirt to pavement? I mean, what sort of transition, or, I think it just would really be messy.
City engineer? Sit quietly in the back. Eventually you're going to get called on.
You wish you were sick tonight, too?
Mayor, members of council, yeah, I was hoping I could stay quiet back there. Your concern is valid. It takes a little bit of design challenges. I'm not going to say it's impossible to do. We do it in several different places. You know, the transition of, say, asphalt to a gravel section, it can deteriorate. We have a standard that we use in West Laramie to help prevent that, but it still can happen. There's a couple different design options you can do. As far as the drainage, you would have to figure out how to account for that, of how to, you know, if the drainage is going from the dirt section of the alley to the paved section, you'd have to make sure that the drainage could get onto the pavement, and there is the maintenance of the dirt washing onto the pavement. So I'm not going to say it's not impossible, but there are design challenges that come with it.
So from a cost situation, if we include some sort of grooming or putting particular maintenance or extra gravel or leveling out of the dirt portion of our alleyway, how much more expensive would it just be to throw pavement on top of it after, if we require them to kind of groom and make it smooth when we go from pavement to dirt or gravel or whatever? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, how much more would it be just to throw in some pavement after they've groomed and maintained the base of the road? Because they can't just go, I'm only going to build this road to this point, right? And I mean, we're going to have to ask them to actually make the alleyway that's dirt nicer than what it currently is, generally, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, wouldn't that make sense to say, you have to at least help us make the road smoother, the alleyway smoother when we transition? So how much more is it to put the pavement on top of it?
Your Honorable Mayor, Councilor Pierce, I don't have that number directly in front of me. Just the way you're describing it, though, if they were required to grade that alley in that area and get it to work, your difference in cost would just basically be the asphalt. The base section would probably be about the same. You're going to have to put base if you want them to go in there and work on it. So they're going to have to put in, 8 to 10 inches of base in there. So basically, the cost difference would just be for the actual asphalt.
So that's currently not what the amendment is asking them to do, though. What the amendment is basically saying is bumpy, not maintained alley with, kind of messy onto really good pavement, and that's what we're saying is okay with this amendment. Am I right?
That is my understanding.
Okay.
Councilor Schuster?
This does happen, like he says, in a couple parts of the city. The car wash at 3rd and Harney, they put a nice pad out there to drive into the alley and drive back on the street. As soon as that car wash stops, so does I'm going to call it, I can't remember if it's concrete or pavement, it stops too, and the rest of the alley there. Car wash has been there 15 years, approximately, and it works. So I don't think it's that big a deal.
So we want to make sure we're just on questions right now,
Okay.
not comments. So questions only. So I have a few questions, and Mr. Jepp, I'm going to direct them at you. Feel free to deflect them. Anybody sitting behind you. All right. So the first question is, so this is the what if scenario. What if 2 corners get paved, one here, one here? So now we have street, pavement, dirt, pavement, street. So we have nothing in the code that would require them to close the gap in the middle. Is that, and that might be a question for planning as it's drafted. Help me.
Honorable Mayor, technical answer is it happens. You have gravel in the middle, you'd have pavement, gravel in the middle. That neighborhood sounds like it's up and coming. You likely have a demo of one of those houses in the middle of the block that would eventually put in more pavement until it's all done. But prior to paving, Public Works Department would investigate water line and sewer line replacement.
Okay. So my next question is regarding who maintains and the increased cost. So we see this all the time over in West Laramie, despite design engineering standards where we try to meet, even over on the new sections around Linford. As soon as the gravel road hits the pavement, there's pitting, there's chipping. I mean, it's a problem area. And I'm not sure that there's anything that you can do really to mitigate that. So if this is paved, the city would take it over for maintenance, correct?
That is correct.
So we would be responsible for maintaining a piece of concrete up against the gravel. So that's my first concern, because that's expensive and a pain in the butt for Public Works. And the second is really the cost, I guess, where to the Public Works staff and time. And we're already having a hard enough time just maintaining dirt alleys. In fact, we've cut down our grading of alleys substantially. So this gets a little challenging. So I'm concerned about the cost to Public Works and adding these challenges to them. So that might not be a question for you since Director Smith is not here. City Manager?
Council, we could do some additional analysis, but I'd remind you of the numbers that we presented to you about a month ago, indicating that gravel roadways and I presume gravel alleys, this analysis would apply there as well, but that the gravel roads are actually higher cost over time to maintain than our paved streets. So I think your concern is warranted always when we're taking in new maintenance responsibilities, but I suspect that we would find over the lifetime of that concrete or that paving that it's actually more cost effective than the dirt alleys.
Okay. Councilor McKinney.
So couldn't we put in some wording in there to reflect somebody's doing a fourplex or a sixplex, whatever they happen to be doing or building a house, that they would go from the center of the block to the nearest? That way, covering half the block. If somebody else does the other block, it's covered. There is no dirt between.
My understanding is that is how it was written to some extent, depending on the length of the alley. Mr. Bloom, could you clarify that? Depends on the length of the alley.
The length of the alley, the longest alley in the city is 320 feet, yes?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor McKinney, there are some longer alleys, 600, 700.
Over 400?
A few. There are a couple, not very many. There's one behind Sherman Hill Road. There's another one. Generally, it's under 300 feet.
So
Your
that it's
typical
written
one.
as 400, you'd have to do the entire block.
That's true. That's true.
So I mean, you go from the center line, if you're out on the end of the block or you're in the middle of the block, you have to go from the middle of the block to the nearest, and you can choose which way you'd like to go. I mean, I don't know, just a suggestion.
Fair question. All right, any other questions before we take public comment on this? All right, is there any comment from the public on this amendment? Mr. Coffey, any concerns with drainage stuff? Oh, please.
Maybe drop that.
Okay.
I love the contrast.
Your Honor, councilors, you know, the number one goal for me is like, if we were to take out like paved dirt and like fill it in with pavement and stuff, my number one goal in life is to make everything accessible to the public and like for people with disabilities. But there are just certain things where the money can, where the city only has so much money that they can't make everything accessible. And I think, and there's some sidewalks downtown that are not very they're not the best in terms of accessibility. And as being part of like going to like the LACD community meetings on disability, I think I'm trying to make it accessible for everyone with disabilities, to make it so that everyone can be part of the community. But there's just so much, like based on like land grants, tax monies, that you can only do so much that land has to be part of, like, has to be what I mean by that is like that just certain parts of land cannot be constructed because of the money owners. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Honorable Mayor, Council, Dave Coffey Engineering again. I'm not in favor of this entire section. However, I think a good compromise is what Mr. Plikas recommended. Drainage in the old parts of town, in these alleys, is very challenging, and it may be the single most challenging and most costly, in some cases, solution. In some cases, in lots of cases, there's no grade from one end of the alley to the other. So the solution to that is to somehow raise the alley in the middle. And when you do that, then you have no room with the fences and the telephone poles and everything that's on the sides to accomplish that in an affordable way. The other solution would be to, and I was discussing this with Mr. Japp a moment ago, was put in storm drainage, and that's tremendously expensive. When this old part of town was developed, there was no consideration for the design to accommodate pavement. I would hope that if this passes and moves forward, some leeway in design can be afforded by city staff. If not, I fear that improvement, gentrification in some of these older parts of town will be more costly and more difficult. And if that's the case, we'll see poor homes, poorly maintained homes continue to be the norm. In any case, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Are there any other public comments on this amendment? Okay, back to council for discussion on the amendment. Councilor Stoner?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm on the fence, but I think that I'm going to vote no and follow this with an amendment to remove this section because we have heard ample public comment about it. To me, it's just one of these things that's not like the other. And I would love to get through the reading of this ordinance at large tonight, and I feel like we're close with the power line discussion, but this seems like there's a lot that we need to consider, and some of those things were brought up earlier, and I want to make sure that we're considering all those things thoroughly and not just rushing or getting beat by the clock.
Other discussion on this item? Councilor Hanson.
Just one question. I thought we were going away from alleys wherever we can anyway, right? And so this is sort of a, not superfluous, but a peripheral discussion, because how many alleys are we going to see coming up? This is again for development, right? Or if I tear down my house and put a garage in the back, then I'll have to do something about it. And I think it was just pointed out in the back there that we'll have a few dilapidated houses because people don't want to pave the alley in their reconstruction. But basically, I would agree with Mr. Plikas. It's very expensive the way it's written right now. If I have to, do the whole darn alley, just because I want to put a new garage in the back of my house.
Mr. Wood, could you clarify when it would
Or
apply?
build a fourplex or whatever.
Yeah. Better.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, I just want to clarify that this paving requirement only takes effect if a development is proposing access to an alley. When you're developing on a smaller lot in an established neighborhood that's zoned R3, a lot of developers have trouble fitting all of the parking, the drive aisles, and the maneuvering area on their land. So as an alternative, what they've decided to do is say, hey, can we back into your alley, use that as our, what would be our driveway on our lot, so we can get added density.
Yeah.
So this is essentially us saying, hey, since you're accessing the alley, so you're getting a development bonus, an incentive that you can have more density, more units, we want you to pave that alley because you're adversely impacting the city because we're going to have to maintain that. On the way out, if you were to drive down that alley, you'll feel what an alley feels like that is over-accessed, the one right over here. Any developer could choose to not pave the alley, building a fourplex, sixplex, whatever building they wanted. If they didn't propose access to it, they could leave it as gravel. And it is for anything requiring site plan review or higher. So that's a fourplex, that's Peerless Tire if they were to develop. Like for example, Laramie Plains development, when they built their credit union, they didn't access the alley. They're not using that as a driveway, so they didn't have to pave the alley. Peerless Tire, when they developed in the 90s or whenever that was, they accessed the alley, they paved it. We've all been to O'Reilly Auto Parts. If you come in off the south entrance there, on the gravel alley to their parking lot, you might need an alignment when you leave. So that's what we're trying to prevent.
Charles, could you speak to the frequency of this section being exercised?
Yes, and this, when it comes to new subdivisions, our new subdivisions don't have alleys. No one is planning alleys because number one, they'd rather sell the acreage for their lots. So this is only going to be used in the event that someone is doing a development where they want to do alley-loaded garages, which is not very common. We have the one on Reynolds by Bath. And then for any of those developments that are truly redevelopments in our established neighborhoods. So those are the cases where we're going to see this.
Councilor Blakis.
Just a couple things, real quickly. As far as pavement to gravel, any of you all of us that use the Owl Canyon shortcut to I-25, that's a perfect example of a major road that changes to gravel in a hurry going at a pretty fast speed, and somehow it works. But back to this discussion here. You brought up a really good point. Because of the cost, and I'm not kidding about that cost of $50,000 to $70,000. The reality is, back in the 80s when I was building fourplexes, we just lined the parking up in front. Literally, we just had, if it was a fourplex, you had eight parking spaces right in front of them. As we went into more design concepts and more landscaping, we started saying, hey, maybe the parking works better in back. So what you're going to do with this, if the amendment doesn't pass, is the simple solution is you got to change your plan. You got to put all your parking. You're going to back the unit up to the back of the building, and you're going to put all your parking in front and not use the alley. That's the realistic. And
the lot.
Councilor Hanson's right. This isn't. It's being done in retrofit areas where we're tearing down small houses north of the university and putting up complexes. There's one over here on Fremont is a good example of it. So I just wanted to make those points. And by the way, Councilor Stoners, I'm not opposed to just postponing it or just taking this section out and reworking it sometime in the future, because I think there's a lot of issues that really haven't been thought out in this. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
So could I make, since how it is 8:30, could I make a motion to postpone it in the middle of an amendment, or do we have to vote on this and then?
It'd make me get my book.
I would be willing to withdraw my motion for the time being to entertain a motion of postponement.
For just that section or the whole thing?
Just that section.
Postponement of this section of
Just alleys?
We couldn't postpone this section.
I'm sorry,
we'd have
not
to strike it.
to strike that.
34?
So I was-
Section 34.
I was talking about postponing the whole thing.
I would not be willing to do that.
I think we can get through.
So we have an amendment on the floor right now. We wanted to go ahead and take a vote on this amendment, and then we can talk about this because that was going to be after my amendment. After this amendment, my point to the council, it is 8:30. We have guests in the audience for other items that we need to get done on our agenda tonight. Some of them are not time sensitive, but some of them we've had people waiting all night. So, and this had to be earlier on the agenda because we didn't get to it last meeting. So I would recommend that we postpone this 2 weeks if we're still gonna have a lot of discussion. So can we go to a vote on the amendment? Or do we need to have more discussion?
I would suggest we vote on the amendment, and then I would hope that Councilor Stoner would put in a amendment to take out this section. Strike this section. That's.
All right, any other discussion on this amendment? Everybody's clear what it is still? City Clerk, roll call please on the amendment.
Palikas.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Stoner.
No.
Pierce.
No.
Somerville.
No.
That is 6 yeses and 3 noes, Your Honor.
Okay, that amendment carries. Before we put a motion for postponement on, I want to make a comment, or to strike. I have further amendments that I want to bring or talk about on the power line stuff. So I just want the council to be aware of that. Councilor Stoner?
I move to strike section 34 from ordinance 1978.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Councilor Pecos to strike section 34. Any questions on this before I go to comment from the public? Councilor Stoner, do you want to give a quick explanation of your
Yeah, sure.
striking?
Sure, my explanation is one of these things is not like the other. I am encouraged that we may make progress on power lines and be able to move forward with this. It's been sitting in our queue for a while. The alley discussion, there are a lot of points brought up both by the council and the public that I would like to consider holistically, and that to me doesn't seem super time sensitive.
So I think, to clarify with staff, I think that we would also need in that motion to bring that section back as an independent item.
Yep.
Because if we just strike it, then it's struck, and there's no direction to bring it back. So, motion maker, does that include that direction?
So moved, yes.
Okay, second agree?
And I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any comments from the public on this striking and essential postponement of the section regarding alley paving? All right, discussion by council on this. City Clerk, roll call on this striking and.
Stoner.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Palikas.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
Okay, that motion carries.
Your Honor, does this include a certain time when we're bringing it back?
It did, we were not date or time specific. We'll let the staff work it into their schedule. So, okay.
According to our rules, that doesn't kill it, does it?
No.
Because,
No.
no, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. It's fine. Yep, we're okay. All right, so I want to have a little bit more discussion about power lines. Hopefully this can be relatively brief. I was quite intrigued by the idea of separating the residential from the commercial. I think it adheres to kind of what we're going at here with power lines. So I would look for an amendment that would essentially restrict the undergrounding requirements to the residential zones, R1, R2, R3, and R2M. That would leave all of the commercial zones free to leave their power lines, their business zones, would address cold storage, Cirrus Sky, all the ones that we've talked about, while still requiring the residential stuff to develop with underground or redeveloped for underground lines, so.
So I can.
Councilor McKinney, and I think Vice Mayor wants to put it on the floor.
On the new subdivisions and everything that's going in now, aren't they undergrounding them 2 residentials already?
There, for the brand new stuff, that's
So
right.
does it just not changing anything?
Mr. Bloom?
I don't think it is.
Could be red.
Honorable Mayor and Councilor McKinney, anything new will still have to be undergrounded.
No, I
It's-
get that.
Yep, it's just the existing ones. So anything that's presently,
But we're already doing that with the everything's there, so it's not changing anything, they're just still doing what they do now.
correct.
So I think there's
Yeah,
a difference
my-
here. So
my point.
new power lines, brand new power lines have to be undergrounded with new development. If there's a new development and existing lines, those are this proposed.
If they're on the pole, they stay on the pole. If they're,
Right, they do not have to be undergrounded.
but going to wherever it's going to is undergrounded like it is now.
Only if it's a brand new line. If it's existing, then it would stay.
But only if it's on the pole.
I will let Mr. Bloom clarify, or Jason.
Honorable,
This is why I wanted to do this.
Honorable Mayor and Councilor McKinney, your statement is accurate. If it's a new development, they're gonna take it down from the existing pole and run it underground to that,
Yep.
all in the subdivision.
But if it's a new main power, it's gonna go underground along with everything.
That is
Just
correct.
like they're doing now.
Yes.
Yes. So I don't understand why we're changing it.
Exactly. I don't either.
So I think before
Yeah.
we have this discussion, I need to make sure we have a motion and a second. Just because I think it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the council thinks it's a good idea. So,
Isn't that what we're doing right now?
So
Vice Mayor?
moved.
So actually, I don't think so, because can I go with the
She needs
motion?
a second first.
we don't have a motion, we don't have a motion on the floor right now. So I think there's a lot of,
Make a motion.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what is going on. So I think, Mr. Bloom, I'm gonna have you come back up and re-explain, because I think that the understanding is that this
No.
wouldn't,
That's not extended either.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Can I just say so moved to the statement you made?
No.
Does that?
no, no,
Okay.
that's not gonna work.
Shoot.
So, can you
She
please?
can't make a motion.
I can, actually, it's allowed. Bob says so.
No.
I don't, but,
I have got a motion ready.
so, I think for clarification for
Why
the
do you
council, I would like Mr. Bloom to explain what I discussed with him during the break and what this would affect. And basically, it would affect like the Stagecoach subdivision. It would, as a residential area, they would still be required to underground the existing lines that are there. Mr. Bloom, can you give a better overview and explanation, please?
Yes, Honorable Mayor. What was discussed at break was at the addition of a couple of simple words in subsection A within item number 29. Sorry, I have to pull this back up again.
Okay.
Essentially, after the right before the semicolon, at the end of,
I think it has to do.
Want to take this?
And right there in the poles.
closed out my window. Right after the word "to these poles,"
To these poles.
before
right.
the semicolon, you could add the words "and non-residential" or "and non-residential zone districts." What that would allow for is existing primary phase power, so we've talked about those, we know what those are.
Yep.
Those could remain in subdivisions that are not zone residential. So that would require undergrounding in subdivisions where they're doing a new subdivision and it's zoned LR, R1, R2, R2M, and R3. So these are all the areas where residences would be. If it's zoned B1 business, B2 business, or if it has the residential overlay for business, or technology and office, industrial, those power lines could remain in conjunction with the subdivision. And that would be as simple as adding the words "and
In non-residential zone districts are R1, R2, R3, R2M, and LM.
Honorable Mayor and Council, all you would have to say is in non-residential zone districts.
Okay.
Non-residential.
In non-residential zone districts.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Wouldn't you, since this is at the end of the sentence, add the word only in non-residential? Because it doesn't apply to the, it doesn't apply to the commercial sections.
Except?
And only in,
That would be a double negative because it says in non-residential, so we don't need the word only, I don't think, although it might not hurt.
I think we do.
Mr. Bloom?
I don't think we need the word only. I think it's in non-residential zone districts. Okay, you could have a power line that traverses multiple zone districts. The ones we've mentioned, the examples we have in town, they all actually do, they're all inclusive within a single zone district, so it's not an issue. But there could be a case where you might have one that would traverse multiple ones.
I think I misunderstood. You want to add this after the word and, semicolon and then add what you have.
No.
It'd be after the word pole.
And prior to the semicolon. So go poles in non-residential zone districts, semicolon.
That's why I think you need the word only, because the other ones are accepted. Well, I don't care.
So can I, should I put?
Go for it.
Thank you. So I would like to make a motion to section 29, subsection A, prior to the semicolon and right after the word poles, I would like it to read, to these poles in non-residential zone districts, semicolon, and then and.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Gabriel. Question, Mr. Bloom.
Honorable Mayor and Council, the second recommended motion we had on the cover sheet also asked for the word three-phase to be removed from that same section. I would think it'd be appropriate to add that to the motion as well. That was the request of Rocky Mountain Power.
Where's the word three-phase?
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Hanson, it's in section.
I was just asking about that earlier.
It's
couldn't find
that the ordinance has been, it has the red in there that shows that it was removed. So.
It was removed.
So yeah, it's already gone in our copy.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Oh, I was.
Vice Mayor Pierce,
I've
are you
been looking
amenable to
high and
adding
low
that to your
for this
motion?
So adding,
So you would add and remove the words three-phase from subsection A.
Eh?
Because it's already
But it's already
It's been
removed.
reflected as struck.
It's not there.
It's not there.
Don't worry, it's okay, you can leave it out then.
Just leave it at,
Okay.
Do we need to officially strike this?
it's gone.
Yeah, I think we need to officially strike it. If it was in a previous version and it's reflected as a change here, but we haven't actually made that change, we need to reflect it as in the motion, so.
Where was it?
Mr. Bloom, do you remember where it was, so council has an idea of what they're taking out?
Honorable Mayor and Council is right after the red word existing.
Existing, yeah.
and
All
any
three.
existing three-phase, and you want me to,
Remove the words three-phase.
And he already did it.
Section 29A.
Did. We're doing extras after what we did.
so,
Agreeable to that?
let me just think a minute. So,
Okay.
these poles and any
Is the
existing,
amendment on the floor?
We have an amendment on the floor right now. I'm waiting to see if the vice mayor is amenable to adding this to the third amendment, so we can do this in one.
okay, so existing, attached additional poles and any existing three-phase.
I think the discussion was because we have voltage in here now, we don't need the word three-phase.
Okay, so I'm okay with that. So do I need to just make a motion or amend my motion to actually insert the word
No, no,
three-phase?
to amend it to remove the word three-phase from section 29A.
Even though it's not in
The
what I'm
copy you
looking
have
at,
has
rather.
already reflected the change that we haven't officially done, so we need to make that change per staff recommendation.
Okay.
It's invisible.
So I would like to amend my motion to include, after the word existing, three-phase, and add the words three-phase, secondary.
No, just remove three-phase from section 29A.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all you have to say.
Just remove the words three-phase from section 29 subsection A.
Okay, does the second agree with
Second
adding that to
agrees.
the motion? Okay.
Yes.
All right, any questions on this before we get comment from the public? Is there any comment from the public on this item? Please come forward.
God, I wish we would have postponed this whole thing.
Jim McGrath commenting on the amendment. I oppose the exempting of residential from the exemption. It's, I think if you're going to give business a break, if you're going to give yourselves a break, you should give residential developers a break also. And this is only for primary and for transmission lines. As far as the language that Pacificor is recommending, I agree. I think you should, exempting three-phase is okay. This is getting kind of turgid, our language, but I hope I'm not confusing things more.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on this item? All right, any council discussion on this item? I feel like we've discussed power lines to death. Councilor Schuster.
I think it's wild just what he said, that we're gonna give a business a break, but we're not gonna give one to the general public. I think that's just amazing.
Any other discussion on this item?
Real quick,
Councilor Palikas?
I don't think it's about giving the business a break. I think it's just what makes sense cost-wise. And I got to tell you, first of all, doesn't happen very often in our community. The one place it is happening right now, which is on Stagecoach, these are all vacant lots. They're going to be developed. If that power line's in, every single person has a choice whether to build a house next to that power line or not. I mean, I don't see it as a big deal. It's not like, and once you put up the houses and trees and everything else, I defy you to tell me where the power lines in our community are a huge eyesore. Hey, it's better to have them underground, but it's not like it's something we need to solve in our community. That's just my opinion.
Any other discussion? So I will state very briefly, council has been dealing with this issue for about 2 years, 3 years, something along those lines. They've continuously kicked this can down the road. This is exactly where we were 18 months ago, 2 years ago, when we postponed it and really kicked it down because we pulled it out of a cleanup amendment and didn't bring it back. This is the exact conversation that council had in the discussion between residential and business because nothing seemed to fit right and we couldn't rally around something. I think this is a good compromise. I think burying on these residential lots is much cheaper than the commercial lines that we're talking about. I think it addresses the concerns, and I hope that council will support this so that we can package this up and move it on so that developers know what's going on. Any other discussion? Councilor Hanson?
Are you doing both things together? Because if I go to vote no, then the existing, the words after existing will be backed in again.
That is correct. They are packaged together right now.
Are you forcing my hand?
It's I would never do that.
Just asking for a vote.
Yep, that's right. There you go.
Are you in or are you going to raise? I just want to.
All right. Are we okay with the vote? City Clerk, vote on the amendment, please.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Hanson.
No.
Stoner.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Palikas.
No.
Shumway.
No.
Schuster.
No.
Pierce.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
That's 5 yeses and 4 noes, Your Honor.
Thank you. That amendment carries. We are back on the main motion. Is there any, actually, I think we have one more amendment that staff needs us to do on the cover sheet. And that is to delete section 16 as a repetitive section.
So moved.
Is that correct, Mr. Bloom? Yes. Okay. So I would look for a motion to
Your Honor, wasn't it a concern of the power companies to remove the word three-phase after existing?
It passed. We just did.
Oh,
the vote was 5-4.
Yeah, we passed that. It's gone.
Okay.
It's gone.
Oh.
So the second amendment that staff asked
Oh,
us
yeah,
to
I
do
think
on your cover sheet is to move to
Strike
delete
16.
section 16.
So
Sorry.
moved. So moved.
Counselor Stoner?
I will make the motion, so Angie's.
Okay.
Or unless you want to make the motion.
Yeah, I move to delete section 16 of original ordinance number 1978 on third and final reading and renumber the following sections accordingly.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by the Vice Mayor. Any questions on this? As explained, it's a repetitive section. Are there any public comments on this item or on this amendment? Okay, any discussion on council on this amendment? City Clerk, roll call on this amendment, please.
Stoner.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Polikis.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
That is 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
Thank you. The motion carries. Is there any other discussion or amendments on, this is the third and final reading of this ordinance. All right, City Clerk, roll call on the ordinance, please.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Stoner.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Polikis.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Pierce.
No.
Somerville.
Yes,
That's 8 yeses and 1 no, Your Honor.
that motion carries. That will not be coming back in 2 weeks. All right, let's move on to item number 12. Counselor Stoner.
Oh, a new item.
A new item.
What?
Come on.
Who got off guard?
We did the
Nope, we did. We cleaned everything up. Oh,
No, I said, do we need to take a vote since it's past 8:30 to bring
it's
another?
oh no, it's 9:30. We're okay. As long as we keep chugging away, we're gonna do
There you
this.
go. Number 12, right?
Number 12.
I move to reject the previously approved resolution 2018-17 authorizing an $11,666 cost share with the Laramie Regional Airport to aid in the cost of upgrading internet service to the Professional Air Park and Research Center, Cowboy Aviation.
Second.
Second by the Vice Mayor. So we are here on a reconsideration. This was approved several weeks ago, and council brought it back from a reconsideration. It's my understanding the airport would like us to ask to postpone it while they're investigating some grant opportunities. But before that, we have Mr. Tim Stamp here. He's the airport board president, and I thought he could come up and give us a brief overview since we weren't able to have you here last time, and maybe answer a few questions before we vote on a postponement.
Be glad to. Mayor, members of the council, we went to the process of finding a location and and providing easements to run not fiber optic cable. You need to understand this is running conduit, fiber conduit. And the intent was that at some point in time, we want to allow multiple providers to use that conduit. We asked to get an estimate for that cost, and then we went to you, the county, and ourselves and said, let's divide this in thirds, because the city and the county are the owners of the airport property. And then all heck broke loose, I guess. But in reality, what we did was locate the easements and where it was going to go, and then we wanted to get a price for running that conduit, and then come back to you and ask if you would fund that part. But we wanted to go out, and we are going to put out business specs for it after that, knowing that that price could be either reduced or greater. We would accept the responsibility out of our savings to do if it came back as more than what we had the estimate for. We were pretty sure we had a fairly close estimate. We used a reputable company that does a lot of this stuff. So that was our intent. In regards to Mr. Glass's questions of using a aerial or satellite system or whatever he wants to call it, we have requests for the ability to use fiber. And we have some businesses that want that fiber, and so that was our intent to give it to them. But that does not mean that we were forming any alliances with any one provider of the fiber, glass fiber that goes through that conduit. Okay, so let's just make that clear at this point. That was our intent. We're doing the same thing you guys do when you do a grant. We went out, got a price, so we had some idea of the cost that we're talking about, and then we came to you and said, would you help us fund this at this price? We didn't ask you really to approve the funding. We asked you if you would approve us asking you for the funding after it was installed. So that was our intent. Now we've had some opportunity. We've gotten some information from the city grant writer that she may have found us a grant that we can pay for it. Great. We'd like that. But at that point in time, we thought the owners of the property should probably absorb the cost of putting in that infrastructure. Okay.
Are there any questions for Mr. Stamp?
I have brought for you the easement documents that where the fiber will run, or not the fiber, but the conduit will run, and it allows people to.
Thank you. Thank you.
It allows people to access the various lots within the business park, if they so choose.
Mr. Stamp, as we discussed earlier, a postponement to May 15th, that would be the second meeting in May. Is that still the desired timeline?
That, I hope so, because we've just got, we've got some information from the state's fiber or connectivity group on the specifications, and they're going to help us write the specs for it. So.
Fair enough. Any other questions for Mr. Stamp? Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So, any other questions the city staff can answer before we go to the public? Okay. Public comment. Please come forward.
Mayor Somerville, Mayor, members of council, Brett Glass. When I learned of this proposal only when it came before council a few weeks ago, and looked into it, and what I discovered were some things that were a little bit disturbing and were a little bit different than what Mr. Stamp has said. As you can see from the diagrams that you have there, the proposed funding would be used to construct a conduit that would in turn go off of the airport property to connect to another conduit, which in turn would go only to a fiber cabinet which is owned by CenturyLink. The only use for that conduit would be if you were getting service, internet service, through CenturyLink's fiber lines. There'd be no other use for that. If you were to go to Charter, it wouldn't end anywhere near their facilities. Certainly not ours. We don't have fiber running out there. We use different technology, which is superior. So it really would be a subsidy to CenturyLink, and that was our biggest concern there, because public money should not be used to subsidize one potential bidder to provide a service. When we need to serve somebody, we build the cost of that into the service, and we take care of building that ourselves. We don't rely on public money to build out our infrastructure. And it really should be the same for all providers. So I and my company felt that it was improper for public money to go toward financing one provider, and to potentially allow it to give a lower bid when either the airport itself or a tenant in its business park went out for service. So that was our big concern there. The document also didn't mention any requirement for pull tapes or other provisions that would allow fiber to be pulled through by more than one provider. And that's a big concern, because it's essentially it would mean that whatever provider got there first, which again would be CenturyLink, would be the only one to be able to put fiber in the conduit. Also, I requested, and it took some doing to get this, I managed to get the minutes of the airport board from the meeting where they approved this. And it said the conduit would be used by CenturyLink for fiber link to the airport, and it talks about the route selected and the estimated costs. And then it said that there was a motion which was included to include reimbursement for this cost by the developers of the business park. So the city would be paying for this, and then the airport board would be reimbursed by the developer. So essentially, this would be double dipping. Eventually, the money that came from the city, the airport board would pay once by the city, and then again by the developers for the infrastructure. And I was a little bit concerned about this because it really looked as if that what was happening there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sure looked that way based on the minutes. Also, this is supposed to be a three-way cost share, and the county commissioners were supposed to approve this. But the original resolution that came before council didn't include any provisions to condition the funding on the county approving this too. And in fact, the county just removed it from their agenda for this meeting. So at least as of the moment, they don't even have anything on the table to approve it. If you were to approve this, you certainly should condition it on the other partner being involved in doing this. Now, I want to make it clear that as the mayor was quoted in the paper, saying that good internet, at the airport is important, and I 100% agree with this. And that's why I would like my company to have an opportunity to provide that. We have a technology which is much less expensive and also much more reliable than fiber. It's, as a matter of fact, one company calls it air fiber. It's millimeter wave radio. We can do tens of gigabits of data at a fraction of the cost, and we don't have to bury anything, and a backhoe can't dig it up. It's far, far superior to to anything you can do with fiber. And so all we ask is that when tenants at the airport or the airport itself want internet connectivity, there be a fair process that doesn't use public funds to advantage any one bidder, that gives us an opportunity to weigh in and bid on doing this. And I'll be wholeheartedly in favor of the city and or the county funding infrastructure within the airport grounds, for example, to connect the buildings together using conduits that might even contain fiber, to connect all the buildings together, because that's important. That's part of the airport infrastructure. What we ask is that you not approve anything that gives any one vendor, especially before bidding has even taken place, an advantage over any other vendor when it comes to serving the airport or serving the tenants there. And so what I'd like you to do is reject the current resolution, but do entertain things in the future specifically that are fair.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment on this item?
I'd like to clear something up for you.
Can you sign in? Mr. Stam, so I do not want to get into a back and forth.
No, I just want to let you know that there's two handholds. There's one that's at the driveway of the National Guard building, and yes, CenturyLink has brought their fiber out to that point because the Guard building is going to use it. We would have a handhold on our property line. And if CenturyLink wanted to connect to that, they could from their handhold. That was not intended to just allow CenturyLink the access to the conduit. So, just so you know that was not necessarily the issue. Yes, CenturyLink told us that if we would put the conduit in, they would connect through our fiber if a customer wanted it. So we said, great, there's at least one provider. But we're not going to bar anybody from using the conduit. So.
Thank you very much.
So I apologize, but if we currently have on the floor option number 2, correct? So thanks. I just wanted some clarification just to remind me where we are. So on the floor is option 2.
It is.
Thank you.
So and I also want to share, we have an email that came to the city from Jack Skinner, the airport manager, that requests that the airport, it says at this time the airport is requesting that the cost share proposal for this project be removed / postponed. They want to be able to investigate this grant opportunity first before they come back to have any other conversations. My understanding is that is why the county removed it from their agenda as well this morning. So I would certainly entertain, if anybody wants to answer questions, we can do that, or I would entertain a motion to postpone this to the May 15th meeting.
Don't we have a motion on the floor already?
Councilor McKinney?
If we pick option 2, it's just tabled or it's gone?
It's gone. So if we
So then we're gonna bring it back ourselves?
So what was instructed to me by the city attorney, and I would certainly let Holly weigh in, the conversation I had with Mr. Southard is because this is a reconsideration, so there's stuff that's a little different. So if we continue with the reconsideration and we essentially vote this down, so we move to deny and we're successful in that, then they cannot bring this back. So if the grant opportunity doesn't work and they still want to do this, because we voted it down, they cannot bring it back for like a year or something like that. So it was his suggestion that we postpone it and find out what they want to do first, and then council can make a decision. We may not even need, we can vote it down because they may not need our money, but if they do have to come back to us for a cost share, it would be easier for the airport to modify, or for the council to modify what's here, rather than kind of traversing the ground of having voted this down. Does that make any sense?
Postponement.
That's what.
So just
Bob
put a motion
recommended.
to postpone? is
Right,
what-
that's.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for, is a motion to postpone until May 15th. Councilor Plicas?
I would make a motion that we postpone this before us until May 15th.
Second.
A motion and a second. City manager?
Mayor and council, I guess my question is the airport intent, so our understanding at staff level was that their intention was to remove this because the motion that could come forward could be substantially so different, even the amount could be different, that it was being asked to be removed. As Mr. Stamp said, they investigate other grant options, you know, and then they come back with a different request. And I was not privy to the conversations, Mayor, that you had with the city attorney. But in my experience, a motion that is going to be substantially different can come back and doesn't have to be postponed. So I guess my question is, how substantially different might they be coming forward with? And I only throw that out there from a procedural standpoint because postponing things like this is, you know, there's a burden on staff to track it. And if it's going to come back in a substantially different form, then it seems to me you reject it and let them bring back something substantially different.
That is certainly a fair conversation, and that is the conversation that I had with Mr. Southard before he left. And without knowing what this could come back as, they may come back and want the same thing. If the grant doesn't pan out, they may come back for the same thing. And his concern was of creating a structure where we would bar them from coming back because we voted it down. So that's what his recommendation was based on. I'm happy to defer to our assistant city attorney and council's pleasure, but that's what Mr. Southard recommended to me.
And Mayor and Council, I did speak with Mr. Southard, and he had advised that the proper thing to do was probably a postponement on the issue.
Any other questions or discussion? Is there any comment from the public on the postponement? Any further discussion from council on the postponement?
Just one point I want to make, we can always deny at the postpone, after, on May 12th or 15th.
Absolutely.
And then accept another motion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree, we can. It's just a burden on staff, and it's not borne in the attorney's office.
Councilor Shelby, do you have a comment or a question?
I have a question.
Please.
Initially, when this came before us, I had a concern and I had a question, and I don't think I ever received an answer to it. And the question I have is this: when did the city enter into an agreement to cost share with all the proposals at the airport? For example, now we're looking at, you know, a new terminal, maybe paving the parking lot, whatever comes down. When did we enter into an understanding that we would do cost sharing with the county and the airport on all of their proposed improvements? I know we've been very supportive in making sure that we are very generous with our outside agency funding, but my question is this something new, or is this something that's just I've missed? When was it that improvements at the airport became a third of our responsibility?
Mr. Stamp, do you want to speak to that, or I can?
very simple answer to that one. When you created the Joint Powers Board, it's really your airport, yours and the county's. And when you created the Joint Powers Board, you own that property and own the stuff that's going on to it. And so we're just managing it for you, so to speak. And if you want to change that format, that's fine. But we can't do anything other than the grant applications and the things that we've done to try and improve the airport, including runways, a business park, which you participated in, a new terminal, hopefully, that we need. That's, I guess, the easiest answer to that question, Joe, is that when the Joint Powers Board was created, that became part of the city and county joint facility.
So your assets are our assets?
Yeah. They're not our assets. I don't understand where.
Well, Tim, I'm asking you this. If you have $100,000 in your account, do we have access to that?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
You want to take it, take it.
All right.
We'll hand you the keys and let you run it.
All right.
So,
Vice Mayor.
So, to Mr. Stamp or to this general discussion, typically when we do enter into and have discussions of this nature, we have a presentation from the board. We expect a transparent budget. We expect to be informed of all these things, and we expect citizens to be able to find the minutes and a number of other things. So I think perhaps we need to have that conversation with you related to our expectations, and maybe we haven't done that. So I think maybe we need to do that, not at this time, obviously, because I think I'm a bit off topic.
Yeah, you are, and you're going to get pulled back in here.
Yeah, so I think we need, in the future, I think we need to have that conversation.
So right now, we have a motion for postponement. I want to be a little flexible because Mr. Stamp is here if there were for specific questions about the airport stuff. Mr. Glass, we've already had public comment. So because of the hour, I'm going to have to restrict this. To the postponement, Mr. Glass, you can come up and speak specifically to the postponement. You are correct. Please come forward.
Yes. Madam Mayor, on and against the motion, what I think, considering that any proposal which would come forward in the future would hopefully be substantially different because it would not include, yes, this is on the postponement, would be substantially different. What I'd ask is, what I would advocate, I think the simplest thing would be not to postpone, but to vote in favor, but to then vote in favor of the main motion, and then when a new proposal came, it would be different enough that I don't think you would run into the problem of reconsidering the same thing again.
Thank you very much. Is there any more public comment on specific to the postponement? Any other council discussion specific to the postponement? City Clerk, would you roll call on the postponement, please?
Gabriel?
Yes.
Hanson?
Yes.
McKinney?
Yes.
Palikas?
Yes.
Shumway?
Yes.
Schuster?
Yes.
Stoner?
Yes.
Pierce?
Yes.
Somerville?
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
Thank you. That motion carries, and that item is postponed. All right, let's move on to item number 13. Councilman McKinney, please.
I move to approve original ordinance number 1981 on the first reading, zoning 5 parcels of land from LM Limited Manufacturing to B1 Limited Business for the ROB Residential Overlay of Business, and establish the ROB Residential Overlay of Business overlay on 1 parcel of land, and set second reading and a public hearing for March 20th, 2018.
We have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Stoner. Mr. Because of the hour and because this has 3 readings, and I imagine we'll be here again for second reading, I would invite you to be brief.
Say thank you.
I mean that in the nicest way possible. It's just 9:15, and I don't know how these discussions.
Mayor and council, I will be brief.
Thank you.
As advised.
Requested.
Mayor and council, this is regarding the lots that are located on Crystal Court. Crystal Court has 6 lots. Those 6 lots presently today, one of those lots, if you remember a long time ago, was rezoned to accommodate, to B1 to accommodate a residential housing development. The remaining lots are zoned LM. In 2013, we underwent the Turner Tract Overlay Plan project where we reconsidered the Turner Tract Overlay Zone and the planning document that's associated with that. Because of the Laramie High School and some of the residential development, that large change that we saw in that area, that plan recommended that within this cul-de-sac that we allow for commercial mixed-use development. Commercial mixed-use development is not allowed in the LM zoning district. However, it is allowed within the B1 ROB overlay zoning district. Through this amendment, what that would do is allow for both business uses and residential multifamily uses within the cul-de-sac in a mixed-use environment per the Turner Tract Plan, which was adopted by this council. And so, being very brief, that's what we have before you today. The ordinance, I will note, is a little bit confusing and broken into 2 sections because technically there are 2 plats there. One is the original plat and one is the revised. So that's why it's a little bit lengthier of a motion than you typically would see for this. So,
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the brevity. Questions for Mr. Teeny? Councilor Hanson.
Just to clarify, we're doing this because we have sort of moved in our minds the housing matter from one side of the street to the other, and this is the proposed lot to put it on. And the question that I have, those folks that are going to build there, they are in agreement with this? We are not going just through generations here and then find out they may not be interested.
Mayor and council, this would be irregardless of any development proposal that we've been considering, even on this property. This is to match up with the planning document, the Turner Tract Plan. But it will open up more opportunities because it does allow for both those commercial uses and those residential uses within that area. So, and it would accommodate the one development that we have talked about, which is the cornerstone development.
Yep. That was the cornerstone of my question.
Very good. Very good. Other questions for city staff on this item? All right. Thank you. Do we have any public comment? We've lost the public.
Apparently not.
Discussion from council on this item? Seeing none. City clerk, can you do a roll call on first reading, please?
McKinney.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Stoner.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Polikis.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
Thank you. That motion carries. On to item number 14. Councilor Schuster.
Thank you. I move to approve Resolution 2018-20B, adopting city goals and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign.
Do we have a second? Second by Councilor Stoner. City Manager.
Mayor and council, I'll be brief, obviously, given the hour. As noted in the cover sheet, presented for you tonight were 2 draft resolutions. You've moved Resolution B, which would incorporate some modifications from the rough draft of goals that you established about 3.5–4 weeks ago now. Those refinements to the text as contained in Resolution B are described in the notes section provided in your council materials. And if you have any questions about those notes describing why those changes were recommended, I'm happy to answer them. Okay.
Any questions for City Manager on these? Seeing none, thank you. No public for comments? Any discussion from council on these?
Your Honor,
Councilor Plicas.
I'd like to make an amendment.
Okay.
It's just adding a word. It has to do with item C, which is, item C is talking about improving the conditions of city streets and stormwater management. And the amendment I'd like to make concerns milestone 2. As it presently reads, by September 30th, 2018, adopt a financial policy for improving unpaved and paved undrained areas within the city, considering both municipal and community funding options. The amendment I'd like to make is add a word right before, or excuse me, I'd like to instead of the word community funding options, I'd like to insert the word neighborhood funding options, or West Laramie neighborhood funding options. And the reason for that, well, that's my amendment.
Okay. Do we have a second for that amendment?
Second.
Second by Councilor Schuster. Councilor
The
Plicas.
reason for that amendment, I think it's a little unclear when you put the word community out there, because it has this, to me, the community is the whole community, if you will. And I think the discussion and the directive at the time was work with the neighborhood and work with the West Laramie neighborhood to try to come up with a co-funding option. So that's why I added that word to the.
City Manager, did you have something to add?
If I could just suggest a minor modification to the amendment, assuming the
I'm
first and
open to
second
that.
concur. I just thought, you know, we do have unpaved and inadequately drained areas just on the east side closest to the railroad track. So I wonder if we want to be specific to West Laramie or just say neighborhood.
That'd be fine with me.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Neighborhood.
Okay.
That would be better.
Obviously, those areas are few, but there are some that aren't in what we
Especially down on
consider
First
West
Street.
Laramie. Yeah, down on like First by the
Street,
railroad
yeah.
tracks, yeah. Okay.
I was thinking the same thing. On this side, we have the.
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Is that, is
Yes.
second concurs with that change? Okay. City Clerk, are you clear on that? All right. Questions? There's no public, so questions or discussion on this? Okay,
On the amendment.
on the amendment. Okay. City Clerk, roll call on the amendment, please.
Plicas.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Stoner.
Yes.
McKinney.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Somerville.
No.
That's 8 yeses and 1 no, Your Honor.
That motion carries. Any other discussion?
Your Honor, I have one more word amendment.
Okay, go for it.
This one has to do with milestone 4, item C. So it's just down,
There is no four.
There's no
There is
four.
none.
That's on the,
what am I missing here?
well, that's the old.
That's
Maybe
the old one. There's no
item
four.
B.
There's
You
no
wa-
4 under C.
He's on,
B has a.
he's on
changed
A,
it.
and he wants to be on B.
Milestone 3, you put,
Needs to be under.
We need to be on B,
well, then I don't
right?
need it. I guess what happened, what I wanted to change, well, the one I'm reading is in 2018, adopt a street improvement plan to bring all streets to adequate condition by 2025. Did we eliminate that?
I think the city, so the city manager made some recommendation for changes. That's the difference between A and B. So A is kind of more verbatim what the council said, and B is after it's been worked on by the city manager. So B doesn't have that specific requirement, and it kind of encapsulates the general idea in different ways.
So-
City manager, feel free to explain differently.
No, that's fine.
So this is B here?
It says, Section C, milestone 4, to create a street improvement plan to bring all streets to adequate condition by.
That's resolution A. We're on resolution B.
Yes.
A, so the item that's on the floor is resolution B, not A.
Yep.
And B doesn't have that in it.
Let me just, so is there a milestone that addresses adopting a street improvement plan to bring all streets to adequate conditions by 2025?
Not quite, but city
Mayor and
manager,
council,
please.
under resolution B, I recommended that milestones 1 and 4 under C be kind of married together. Yeah.
Right.
And it now reads, upon adoption of a financial policy for improving unpaved and undrained areas, which is in C2.
Milestone 1.
Then you will adopt a street improvement plan to bring the overall pavement condition index to non-critical levels by 2025.
I'm fine with that, because that.
Get at what you hope to do?
Yeah, I was gonna, yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, City Clerk, can you do a roll call, please?
Gabriel,
Yes.
Hanson,
No.
Stoner,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
McKinney,
Yes.
Polikis,
Yes.
Pierce,
No.
Somerville.
Yes.
That is 7 yeses and 2 noes, Your Honor.
Motion carries.
It was up on that mast.
We are very quickly on to item number 15, public comments. I see no public. Moving on to item number 16, consideration of future council work session topics. Is there anything anybody would like to put on the list right now for future work sessions?
How about power lines?
Can I borrow your little squishy ball?
Throw it at her and huck it hard.
All right. Any other work sessions besides power lines? All right, seeing none. Upcoming meetings, just a reminder, please continue to look at that schedule. They are continuing to put budget stuff on there, so you'll see that start to kind of clog up your schedule in the next few months, so please keep an eye on that. Item number 17, Councilor Hanson.
I move the council adjourn to executive session regarding litigation according to Wyoming statutes paragraph 16-4-405, section bracket A, Roman numeral 3.
Do we have a second? Second. Second by Councilor Stoner. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion carries. We are adjourned to executive session regarding litigation.